Breaking news. Joe Biden's immigration platform. Is he dragging a Trojan horse behind him? You've got to check this out. I'm Dan Stein, president of FAIR. Subscribe to our content here on YouTube so you can get all the latest breakdown on news and information about immigration policy. The Biden-Harris immigration platform is a long document. Doesn't contain a lot of numbers, a lot of specifics. So we're here to tell you, we're the experts at FAIR, how to break down these numbers and what they really mean. And I'm joined, as I say, by Spencer Raley, Director of Research here at FAIR. He and his team have taken a close look at what the Biden-Harris campaign are promising, and you really need to take a look. Now, I want to precede this by saying FAIR does not endorse political candidates. Nothing in this video is designed to suggest who you should vote for in this upcoming election. What we are providing is an informational analysis of what's in the platform so you can be aware. And we are also doing this with the Trump campaign. So Spencer, tell us about the Biden-Harris immigration platform.
Thanks, Dan. And like you mentioned, the Biden campaign has actually laid forth a pretty detailed wish list when it comes to immigration. It's very long. It has a lot of new proposals, a lot of new visa categories that they want to implement. They want to drastically increase the refugee cap. They want to offer mass amnesty for all illegal aliens that are currently in the United States. But what it doesn't do is clearly detail the impacts of their platform on American voters. So we decided to do that for them and take a deep dive into what it would actually look like if you implement these policies. And
do we think that the Biden himself has ever looked at what the numbers would be under these proposals, or is he just signed off on something that sounds nice?
Well, I really don't think I can answer that question. Based on what we looked at, I would guess not, because if all of these policies were implemented, we found that it could lead to as many as 52 million additional immigrants entering the country in the coming years.
All right, so when you say the coming years, you're talking about like maybe a 10-year period?
It could be over that. Some of these don't really have a hard deadline of when, we estimate that these new immigrants could enter the United States. A good portion of it could be in the next 4 to 5 years. Some of it could be pushed out to 10 years, maybe a little after that. And of course, it depends on how many of these policies are actually implemented.
Well, it's pretty clear right now we have a foreign-born population of about 44 million, I think, in the country. About 17% of the population foreign-born, historically all-time high. So it took us about 50 years to get to 44 million foreign-born population. You're saying under the Biden plan, we would more than double that in a few short years, right? So let's break down these numbers, astounding as they are, and tell us how you got to those assumptions. What are the numbers and what are the assumptions?
Well, what we did is we just essentially, first of all, took the platform, on face value. We looked at what they said and went and found data that would apply to as if those immigration policies were instituted exactly how they want. And it really, some of them are very direct, short-term things. For example, if you implemented all of the new visa categories that the Biden campaign wanted to implement, you would be looking at, 200,000 or more new employment-based visas, such as HB1 visas. Some of the figures are kind of just tucked in there. For example, they want to implement a new city-based immigration visa where a city can say, hey, we feel like we need more people in our visa, or a lot of people are leaving our city due to other policy changes they didn't like. If you look at the programs they want to implement, many of them request at least 500,000 new visas in addition to everything else that the United States is currently offering, which could lead to, at least 2 million new immigrants coming to the United States before even the end of Biden's first term, should he be elected. But
this is kind of a major city recolonization program. You have policies basically taxing, spending, social policies that are driving out your population, your tax base. They're leaving those cities, going to other Sunbelt places where there are lower taxes, lower crime. And the proposal here is that you would be able to petition to get foreign immigrants to come and live in your city
Exactly.
And he said it was 2 million of those in his term, his first term. How would they keep those immigrants in the cities if this is a Buttigieg concept, I think? So if you're petitioning to get people to live in Detroit, yeah, I assume you have an incentive to make them want to live there, but what constitutionally can you do to require an alien who gets a green card to come in and live in Detroit to stay in Detroit?
Well, what a lot of the proposed policies that the Biden administration has promoted on their platform and have spoken about in the past would start off with a visa program that's largely in some ways similar to like an H-1B visa program, but instead of being tied to a particular employer in order to come to the United States, you'd be tied to a particular city, at least until you either decide to leave and go somewhere else or else obtain your green card and then would be allowed to potentially move wherever you want inside of the United States. Now, I don't know if they would include policies to allow a visa holder to transfer to another city if the city would allow that. But in many ways, you're looking at just another temporary to potentially permanent program that would allow cities to say, hey, we implemented these policies. A lot of the people in our cities left because of them. We want to import more immigrants to help us get off consequence free.
Well, what the question of constitutionality comes up here. How if you were to tie somebody to a jurisdiction, a city, and tie that person to an employer in that same city, you have the equivalent of an indenture. And from a constitutional standpoint, the right to interstate travel is sacrosanct in the United States. So the broad public policy here is unclear and it's unconstitutional. It's more like they can't get Americans to live in their cities and they're all fleeing, so they're going to find some sucker from another country to come in and basically try to shovel out their debt and pay off their old debt obligations for pension payments and school unions and all those kinds of things. Maybe there are refugees who would buy into that because of their situation, but the garden variety immigrant, it's hard to understand how. But anyway, he's got 2 million of these, right? He's 2 million of those visas. So that's 2 million right there. You've got an amnesty for whatever, 14 million people. And then you have the relatives who will come in, right? So DHS, Department of Homeland Security, tells us, on average, an immigrant petitions how many relatives?
3.5. So between 3 and 5, you can't have half people.
If you give an amnesty, you give green cards to 14 million people, they're going to petition relatives, right?
Exactly. And this is where the bulk of that new immigration would come from. And I think a lot of people don't really think about that. They think of, providing an amnesty to the illegal aliens that are already in the United States. And, that alone would have a tremendous negative impact on Americans and would incentivize a massive amount of future illegal immigration. But when you just simply do the math of the average number of family members sponsored per immigrant, you're looking at more than 40 million new immigrants eventually entering the United States.
Now, we have the numerically limited family preference categories, not all of them, of course, but the point is the argument would be made that the numerical limitations in these categories would slow down the process, right? Because it's kind of operates like the pig and the python. You amnesty a bunch of people, they petition for relatives, they get what they call a visa priority date. And just like for India and China, what's going to happen is if you don't change the law to raise the overall immigration numbers, you're going to wind up with waiting lists that go on for 50 years. So as part of any reform, two things would happen, right? One is during the pendency of an amnesty program, which is probably rolling in some cases, there would really be no immigration enforcement in the interior for all practical purposes. Decimated, no state, local cooperation, nothing. Second, no employer sanctions, no worksite enforcement. Secondly, there would be enormous political pressure, and certainly as part of this package, they would probably be forced to raise the limits or render unlimited certain categories for family preference, grandfather in those immediate relatives of people who got amnesty, to accelerate the process. So you would really see a tidal wave and an unimaginable increase in tidal wave of immigration as a result of any set of proposals fashioned around the language of this platform, correct?
Absolutely. And honestly, if you just read the platform and take it at its face value, that's what the Biden campaign wants to do. They want to remove as many limits on immigration as possible. So it would just, you would assume that in order to do that, they would have to change some of these rules, remove some of these limits to allow more migrants to come into the United States. And you make a very good point that, and they're very open and honest about the fact that they want to end worksite enforcement for, employers who hire illegal aliens. They want to limit, and as Biden recently said, at least pause other ICE enforcement procedures in the interior of the United States. So what this is going to do is, in best case,
have on future illegal immigration if you stop all enforcement.
Absolutely. And what this is going to do, best case scenario, is create a massive backlog of legal immigrants trying to get into the United States, which of course would incentivize, when you couple it with no enforcement, more illegal immigration to the United States. And they already have the promise of one amnesty, and we haven't even heard limits from the Biden campaign on who would qualify for that. So what you're looking at, best case scenario, is just massive waves of illegal immigrants while the legal immigration system is stuck in the mud. Worst case scenario, you remove all these limits and essentially create a mad dash into the United States to try to immigrate legally.
Are there other categories we haven't talked about that he's promised?
There are quite a few of what I would call nickel and dime categories, although when you look at them, they're really not small numbers. For example, he wants to lift a lot of the caps for graduate and PhD students who are currently in the United States to be able to stay, or in some cases even offer them a green card. We're talking numbers in the hundreds of thousands there. There are a number of other...
sure that a lot of the new jobs we create go to foreign students.
Exactly. And really the troubling thing when you look at proposals like that is knowing that we're still in a very difficult time in the United States economically. There are millions of Americans who are looking for work, including those with advanced degrees, who would happily fill these jobs if they're paid a fair market wage.
Sure. And what has Biden said with respect to Trump's activities, proposals over the last 4 years? What's he going to do with those things?
Well, again, if you read his immigration platform, his first half of it is a description of how he's going to try to undo as much of what the Trump campaign has already, the Trump administration, has already put into action. For example, he wants to remove the new measures put forth by the Trump administration, trying to limit those from coming to the United States who are likely to be a public charge. He wants to remove the limits that the Trump administration is pursuing on DACA, and just he wants to drastically increase the refugee cap. In other words, he wants to undo everything that the Trump administration has done so far to encourage Americans to hire Americans.
What's the public policy rationale behind 52 million more foreign-born immigrants, what have you, allowing foreign students to come take American jobs, rewarding cities with bad tax and social policies to recruit foreign immigrants? And rolling up all immigration enforcement, what's the public policy objective here?
It's largely based on an unsubstantiated claim that more immigration will lead to, in some way, somehow, more jobs for American citizens, that'll lead to a greater investment in the United States economy. But if you just look at, examples of abuse within current visa programs like the H-1B visa, what you see is businesses instead fire Americans. They put Americans out of a job in order to hire someone who is willing to work for a less than fair market wage, because it's still much better than what many of these migrants would earn in their home countries. So it's really based on a faulty premise that, to some people may sound good, it may sound humanitarian, it may sound great for our economy, but in reality, it's been proven to cause more harm than good time and time again.
Is there any recognition in the platform that illegal immigration injures wages or working conditions for American workers, or that there's any job displacement or increased competition?
Absolutely none. They don't touch that at all. In fact, they try to pose most illegal immigrants as beneficial to the economy. And if you look at reports that FAIR has put out, illegal aliens actually cost taxpayers a net of $134 billion every year. So that's another faulty premise that they're putting forth.
You have a cost estimate, but it doesn't really include the possibility of, say, national health care, which I believe the Biden supports. He also said that he wanted to provide health insurance for illegal aliens, right? Although, of course, his position seems to change from day to day, but he did raise his hand in response to the question providing health insurance for illegal aliens. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely.
Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants.
Now, that didn't make it into his platform, so like you said, who knows what his official stance is on that right now. But what we estimate, without even factoring in what healthcare could cost taxpayers, is that under the Biden administration, you could see the cost of illegal immigration on taxpayers increasing by at least 50 to 60 billion per year. And one thing that includes that the Biden campaign has pushed for time and time again is the cost of offering DACA recipients free community college and offering them access to financial aid programs. That alone would cost billions. We estimate approximately $4 billion. So again, it's just handout after handout to not just migrants as a whole, but to illegal aliens as well.
52 million more foreign born would change the political map, would alter the balance between the states, would theoretically help consolidate one-party political control based on voting patterns, and the average income level, given the family preference bias, would probably decrease and would therefore increase welfare costs, right? Would, increase social entitlement costs and things like that. So it's hard to see where they've budgeted these costs, in addition to the fact that all these additional people will require more infrastructure, roads, housing, water, and healthcare and other things. Education would have a huge impact on our public schools, which are already, frankly, marginally functioning at this point. I mean, it's hard to understand why we're not having a greater discussion as a nation about these kinds of proposals, because they are at some level pretty earth-shaking, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And if the Biden campaign budgeted these things and looked at the impact, they are certainly keeping those numbers close to the chest, because as you mentioned, it would be a tremendous increase of cost that would be borne on the shoulders of taxpayers, especially when you look at the average age of those that come to the United States via family sponsorship. It's considerably higher. It's over 30. That alone would lead to shorter careers, which would harm programs such as Social Security. We recently put out a study looking at how immigration can actually harm the Social Security program. And when you look at other things that will be required as well, such as welfare costs, immigrant families consume welfare at a rate several times that of native-born families. And just all of these things, when you put them together, would create a significant fiscal strain on American taxpayers at a time when they're already under a whole lot of fiscal stress.
Well, I wonder, if Biden were actually successful in getting elected, how much of this actually would be turned into law, how quickly? Because if the Democrats control the House and the Senate, theoretically they would want to move pretty quickly. But it's hard to imagine that they've actually thought through the mechanics of how the legislation would work to introduce such a bill of such profound consequences. But we will have to see. I will have to see. But any other final thoughts on this? It's a great report. The name of it is, you can get it on our website, Immigration by the Numbers.
Yes, by the numbers, how the Biden-Harris immigration platform will fuel a staggering increase of immigrants and population growth. This is a report that, again, we just tried to take the Biden platform at their word. This is what it would look like if they implemented what they want to see put into practice. Most of these figures we use by either looking at other FAIR reports or data from the federal government. And like you said, it remains to be seen what would actually be implemented if Biden indeed happens to win the election this November. but it's something that we definitely want voters to be aware of. We want to educate voters in the best possible way. We do that both with Republican, Democrat, independent candidates whenever we can, and highly encourage everyone to go check out this report at www.fairus.org.
Well, I appreciate it. Spencer Raley, Director of Research at FAIR. I'm Dan Stein. It's www.fairus.org, and hit that subscribe button. Get our content, because your information is power. Information is important in this society. And I hope you'll be paying close attention to all the issues coming up. Again, thanks for watching.